Welcome to Gartner ThinkCast. I'm Alexis Waringa. According to a recent Gartner survey, nearly half of CEOs think their AI investment is break-even at best, and only 5% even call it a real win. But why is that? Today, we're exploring why the bottleneck was never the technology. It's that many of us were never taught how to actually think alongside it, question it, or catch it when it's wrong. To help go through what AI literacy actually looks like in practice and how you build it at scale, we're joined by Gartner Distinguished Vice President Analyst, Mandi Bishop. Mandi, welcome in.
Thank you so much for having me, Alexis. I'm really thrilled to have an opportunity to talk about this topic. I'm so passionate about it.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk with you. So right off the bat, you have a blunt message for CIOs and AI leaders, which is you're missing the point. What exactly is that point that they're missing?
Yes, absolutely. So I hear all the time that we're not getting value from our tools, right? We've invested all this money in Copilot and all these licenses, and we're scaling these tools across the enterprise, and people are using it for a week, and then they're not getting anything from it. We're adopting these models, we're making these things. And that's great, and you need to be doing that, but you are not addressing the challenge of AI enablement for your organization, right? You're not helping everyone learn the critical skills that they need to be able to safely and effectively interact with these tools that scale, no matter what tool it is, right? No matter what technology you're using. That's not the differentiator. The people are, and their ability to leverage AI, right, to actually drive that value.
Mm-hmm. And why is maybe the idea to buy more tools usually the wrong next move?
It doesn't matter how many tools you buy, right? So I hate to cook. It doesn't matter how many cookbooks I have. It doesn't matter how many fun gadgets I buy. 2 years ago, I bought an air fryer because everybody told me I needed one, and it looks like it's amazing, and I know it can do awesome things. That thing is still in its box somewhere in my house. I can't even find it. My husband has hidden it because he gets so frustrated when I buy these things, right? Just because we have the tools that can do amazing things doesn't mean that we have the understanding or the desire, right? The motivation to really use them effectively.
So where does that gap actually show up in the day-to-day? What does a lack of AI literacy look like in practice?
Sure. So it shows up in a lot of different ways as we use AI more and more, right? It's not just about, from a literacy perspective, knowing that we can use the tools. It's not about understanding, okay, I've got Copilot. I can use Copilot to summarize email. Simple thing. If you use Copilot routinely to summarize email and you get good enough answers, you don't think about, is that the right answer, right? You start to really trust it too much. So you develop automation bias, and that can have really significant downstream consequences for the organization. And being able to identify and really help users think through, how do I validate? How do I continue to make sure that in my use of AI, it is reliable, right? And that the consequences of the decisions that I'm allowing it to make, this type of automation bias, are something that I can prevent up front. Yeah, but so it can show up downstream. I work a lot with healthcare, and you think about, if I am a caseworker for someone who's been discharged from the hospital, and I have tools now that can summarize the information from that hospital encounter. I review that summarization, and the AI tools give me that summarization. Then you can click through and it gets pushed downstream to their healthcare doctor, right? So it gets pushed downstream to use in clinical practice. Well, if I think the summary is genuinely okay, and I stop really reviewing it, and I stop actually making sure it's correct and that it's complete, then the quality degrades, and it could actually end up harming someone downstream. So whether it's a human that it harms or whether it's the organization that it harms, there's very real consequences to not getting this right.
Yeah, as you noted, healthcare, there are very high consequences there. And for a lot of jobs, it's easy when the answer looks right and you're busy and you have something right there that seems like you can just grab it and use it.
Yeah, exactly. And then another thing that happens is everybody's really worried about the cost of AI right now. And it's very, very expensive to iterate through a long conversation with AI when you didn't have the discipline, the prompt discipline, to effectively engage with it from the first place, right? Like if I had asked the right question in the right way, I would have been much more likely to get the right answer the first time and minimize that token cost, which we know is one of the most, volatile cost factors that we have in dealing with AI. And more, the rigor we can put into these types of practices, the better the literacy around why that's important, the more we can control our costs.
Exactly. So why do organizations pivot to tools immediately instead of building the skill first? What do you see?
This isn't unique to AI. This is just a problem that's been exacerbated by AI. So the consequences for doing it with AI are just very different. But we've seen this. It's always been a shiny, getting distracted by shiny toys factor. We love to look at what's the new technology that promises tremendous value. And, for the last 20 years, it's been automation technologies, right? So we get a lot of promise for value realization from this tool or that tool, or it's a new workflow tool, or it's a niche vendor for analytics. And the promise of that value realization very rarely, lives up, like the reality very rarely lives up to the promise. And but they all have, from an AI tool perspective, there's so much pressure to deliver on AI, right? There's a lot of fear of missing out. Organizations are accelerating AI tremendously. And so buying these tools and expecting the tools themselves and the training on the tools to close gaps and to really enable this level of literacy, it's the disconnect. So you buy the tools because they have this huge promise of value, and with AI that, it's expected to be exponentially higher value than it would have been with just some normal rules-based approach to doing a thing. But we're training them how to use the tools, but we're not training them how to engage with AI. And so just because they know how to use a tool doesn't mean that you're getting value from that implementation.
Do you see this as a genuine blind spot or a leadership incentive problem?
It's a bit of both. So whenever I'm having these conversations and I talk about the critical thinking and the problem solving, we have survey data that supports that those are, some of the most important skills that CIOs are looking for when they're hiring, right? They're recognized as very important. A overwhelming majority of them say that even something as simple as beginner prompt discipline, like prompt engineering, can have a huge effect on value realization. But it's much easier to measure how you interact with a tool. Like it's much easier to measure, did you complete your Gartner University, learning requirement on AI? Did you complete your Microsoft University requirement on Copilot? That's something that's measurable. And so they've struggled to identify and quantify ways to cultivate these much more basic competencies. And so it's a blind spot. They know that they need it, but they don't really have a good way to measure it. And so from a leadership perspective, if you can't manage what you can't measure. So it's created a gap and the blind spot in that we know it matters, but we don't know how to deal with it. And so we're just going to accept that that's a challenge, and we're going to move with the stuff that we can measure.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned CIOs are thinking about this, but whose job is this really? IT, HR, everyone's?
Yeah, it's everyone's. It's interesting. We've got survey data that supports, I think it's 95% of the CIOs who responded to a talent survey were saying that it is their responsibility or a shared responsibility to enable it. And those CIOs, only 5% of them said it's HR's responsibility alone. So I think intuitively for learning and development, we typically lean to HR, right? We look to HR to develop the materials and to be able to deploy these things across the enterprise. But for AI, it's such a blend of technology understanding. You don't have to have deep expertise. You don't have to be an engineer, but you do have to understand what's different about AI technology in conjunction with what this means for the organization, what this means for your career development. So that blend in responsibility across the C-suite, anywhere that this is going to be deployed, there needs to be ownership of AI literacy. And so it really is a joint effort of leadership across the organization.
So if we need to build this AI literacy skill, how should organizations go about actually doing that practically?
Yes. So this is great. There are several ways, and you think of it as an enabling factor. And I want to use a really quick analogy here. Think of AI as a race car, and you don't start driving in a race car unless, there are some child prodigies who do this, but they're very, very few and far between. First, you learn how to steer, right? You learn how to steer a car, and then you learn how to work the pedals, and then you learn how to steer and work the pedals, and then you learn how to do that with other cars around you. And you continue to build those fundamental skills until you are ready to race a car at speed. And then there's corners, there's all of these other variables, but you don't start there. You don't start with like a Formula One, 250 miles an hour going around hairpin turns, right? Like that's not where you start. And so baselining, like one of the first things organizations can do is baseline their employees around their aptitudes and attitudes and adoption of AI. And it's not just for the workforce. It's understanding, how do your employees think about AI use in general? Because that'll give you a way to identify your personas for AI users, right? So who are going to be those that are reluctant to use AI? And who are going to be those who become your AI champions and your influencers who can help bring the peers along? So that's the first step, is understanding where you are so that you can really identify those personas. And then there's this thinking about the human AI enablement component. I created an academy approach that's looking at, this is the steering wheel, these are the pedals, right? This is the basics of how you engage with a model. And creating ways to assess critical thinking, model engagement, and then your output discernment, right? Can you identify subtle fallacies? If I give you a prompt and then the output of a prompt, can you identify what went wrong? Can you validate that using primary sources that aren't AI? Do you know how to validate things? Do you understand the consequences for when things go wrong, right? So developing that type of critical thinking, and then developing prompting skills. Can you get to the right output the first time, right? So how can you avoid that continuous iteration that's really costly? And then that discernment is understanding the output, and the output could look different or be interpreted differently depending upon who you are. So your role would really determine the output, and then the type of content that you wanted, the format that you wanted. All of those factors can affect that discernment. So the Enablement Academy is really built on those three things. And this is the steering wheel and the pedals.
AI is everywhere. But what does it mean for your business? Gartner is the world authority on AI, with more than 200,000 client conversations and more than 6,000 written insights on AI in 2025 alone. Leaders across the C-suite, just like you, are partnering with Gartner to turn AI ambition into impact. Go to Gartner.com/AI to learn more.
Mm-hmm. It seems like maybe critical thinking would actually be the hardest of those three to teach. How do you make something like that concrete?
Yes. So it's really interesting, because there's the critical thinking we know is eroding with AI. There have been a number of studies on this, from several organizations. It's eroding universally with AI, right? Unless we continuously cultivate it, but it is hard to measure. So one of the exercises that I've created in this Enablement Academy is what I call a hallucination hunt. And so it's identifying those subtle fallacies and then being able to, demonstrate, did you identify it? Did you validate it? Do you have a repeatable process that you could use to validate it? Can you correct it? And then when you correct it, do you get the right outcome, right? Did it correct the outcome? So can you correct the prompt, correct the outcome? And you can quantify how, whether or not someone did those things, was able to execute that. And you can quantify, their overall score, right? Their overall maturity in that type of critical thinking. based on really simple criteria and fun exercises. So you don't have to make this hard. You don't have to buy a new tool to do this. Like these types of things are tool agnostic. But breaking it down into very small, finite, quantifiable steps that you can then measure over time is how to tackle it. And the thing is that these skills aren't something that you teach once and then assume that someone who's a developer who has been using AI GitHub and they're actually, doing windsurf, they're coding with AI every day. They might have that automation bias, right? They might be falling back and over trusting the outputs. And so this type of an approach to continuously cultivating and measuring their critical thinking, they would have a more complex hallucination, right? Like the way that you would measure them, the types of inputs you would give them would be different than you would for someone who's walking in, without any real AI expertise, which you'd know because you baselined them. But you can still measure that same maturity. Like it's exact same rubric. It's just, is the level of the prompt, and is it a system prompt or is it an LLM prompt? That changes, but the measures don't.
I mean, you mentioned it's ongoing, but it almost seems like this is something that even needs to start happening at that childhood level in schools. I know teachers talk about their students are using AI. So it's like, all right, change the assignment from just writing a paper to what you noted, finding the hallucination.
Yeah, exactly. And there are teachers who are doing that. My sister is actually a fourth grade teacher, and she is having to do that in the fourth grade. She is having to have very real conversations with her fourth grade students about Yes, and it's not, and that young, they're not necessarily doing their homework online, although they had to, right? With COVID, like a lot of things have changed about the way we teach children. But she is starting to, and she has to have this level of literacy so that she can teach it. So it's really proliferated across like society. This is not just an employer problem, right? This is a societal world problem.
Yeah. It's not just IT. It's not just leadership. It's society.
That's right. It's all of us. We all need to be making sure. And even something this simple, right? I ask myself every time I have a question that I am like going to go to my phone for, I ask myself, okay, do I want to spend a water bottle worth of a query, right? Do I want to spend a water bottle worth of an LLM conversation for something that I should just Google? Like you have to, and so that's a new level of critical thinking for me that I never had to consider before. But I like, okay, do I want to expend those resources? Is it complex enough that I need that type of assimilation? Or, do I just need to know the hours that the restaurant down the street is open?
Right. Yeah. And as you noted, as tokenizing gets more expensive and whatnot, it's going to become a really important skill to have of knowing when you should use it and when you shouldn't.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's the tokenomics of the AI equations are becoming, that is already such a huge factor, right? In the volatility of costs. And now we're seeing some signs about changing cost models. Because eventually those companies are going to have to make money, right? Like eventually we're going to get there. And then those companies are going to pass down costs to all of the embedded AI that's within enterprise applications. Like there's going to be a significant change. So getting people in the right prompting discipline right now and helping them engage the most effectively, both with the LLMs as well as when you're building agents, the system prompts, if you can get it right the first time, or at least minimize the iterations, it's going to be far less expensive for your organization going forward. And a lot less frustrating, because like it's super frustrating if you don't get the right answer, right? Or if you're like, oh yeah, no, I didn't ask that question right. I need to change the way that I asked the question. Then you get another answer. You're like, well, no, that's still not quite right. If you have the right discipline and you apply it every single time, you're much more likely to get consistent, better answers.
Mm-hmm. As you teach these skills, how do you measure whether any of this is actually working across all three pillars, not just the one exercise?
Sure. So some of these things are very quantifiable, right? So when I talk about the hallucination, you're able to identify what are the very specific criteria. Did you find the fallacy? Did you validate it? Do you have a repeatable way, right? There's specific ways to do that. The other things like prompting maturity is something where it's more of a maturity model than it is an easily quantifiable thing, because the types of models that you're engaging with are going to have different rules for the way that you need to prompt, right? But there are frameworks like Reflect for prompting, which is, are you including the role an example of the output that you want, the format of the output that you want, the language, right? Like the tone. Do I want this to be a Gartner style response, or am I looking for a blog post? The business context. Are you actually saying what does this mean? Like, why am I asking you to do it? And then the task, right? Because we always go to the task. We always say, this is the thing I want you to do, and don't typically include those other things. So you can measure not just did they do that, because that's easily quantifiable, but you can measure the completeness or get a sense of the maturity from the completeness, the number of iterations that they go through in order to get an answer that's appropriate for that use case. And that's a maturity growth. And then their ability to do that discernment piece, their ability to say, okay, if I change the role, right? If I get the same output and I change the role, what does it mean to that person? And that requires a much deeper level of contextual understanding of what that role would need, right? Like, what does that persona need from that answer? And are they going to be able to get it, or do we need to refine the prompt? So again, that's a maturity level, but you can continuously measure and monitor those things. And as someone's maturity grows, right, as they become more and more literate, then the types of prompts and outputs that you give them to measure these things just become harder. So it's like going through school. Like you continue to do the basics. Like in your writing, I was an English major. I always had to have the right nouns and verbs and adjectives and sentence structures and things. But you're able to experiment and explore a little bit more the more sophisticated you get in your writing. Yeah. And the same thing with the models.
Do you ever encounter pushback with this type of approach? How does this scale without being seen as just another mandatory training that leaders don't have time for?
Yeah, so I do. And the fun part of the pushback is this isn't the type of training that you as a leader have to do yourself. So this type of training is something that is really, it can be incorporated into what we call communities of practice, right? So peer groups where peers are teaching each other and measuring each other. It can also be, they're already doing it. So they're already doing the assessments. They're already doing training, and they're already doing things like having, they've team meetings, being able to incorporate these and gamify these types of training options. And then again, that peer-to-peer learning is so important, because when peers can facilitate these types of exercises, first, it gives those champions, right, or those influencers that you identified when you baselined, it gives them an opportunity to work with people who might be reluctant or just simply don't have the level of exposure and skills. It can keep people motivated. So it's not a have to do for the leadership. It's a must do for the enterprise, but it can be executed in really fun peer-to-peer ways, and it doesn't require any additional funding for a new tool. This is not a new tool. This is not necessarily having to formalize. They can build it into sprints, right? So as you're developing, like this can just become part of the agile methodology. As you're developing new products, you could be incorporating these types of assessments into those product sprints. If it's an AI product, if AI is enabled within this product, test yourself, right? Test the AI, test yourself in using the AI with these types of exercises. And, it can augment existing training programs. It can augment the peer-to-peer. And there's so many opportunities to embed it in daily practices that already exist.
Mm-hmm. To get an idea of how it can actually show progress over time, what does this look like, say, a year into it? What changes exactly in how people work?
Yeah. So first, this can help overcome the sustained adoption problem, right? So we see all the time, and you see it with Copilot in particular, right? People adopt these, and the personal productivity tools are a great example. And they'll adopt it for like a week or two. They go to their training, they get excited about it. They maybe saw a podcast or heard something about it. And so they use it, and they might use it like really a lot, but they'll use it for a week and then they drop it. So this type of training program, if it's persisted, right, if it just becomes part of the fabric of the training, the literacy, those peer-to-peer learnings, then it can sustain adoption. And sustained adoption is really where you start to deliver value. So sustained adoption, accuracy and efficiency in leveraging these tools, those are value drivers. So that's going to help overcome this value gap. But over time, as this just becomes embedded into the fabric of your literacy program, as it becomes embedded into product sprints, as it becomes embedded into the way that you grow your workforce and that you grow those peer-to-peer connections, it can also become over time, this can be seen as a career driver. Yeah, so you're really helping your workforce with this enablement. You're helping them become more valuable, like themselves individually. So you can, help them really harness what these types of skills bring to their market value, right? Bring to their own career.
So if a CIO listening right now wanted to start Monday morning, what's the smallest real step they could take?
Yes, baseline. So the smallest real step they can take is to baseline. And that's, that is a survey instrument. So let me give them an out. If they don't want to do the survey instrument, it's look at your existing collaboration channels, right? So where do you have teams? Almost every organization I speak to is using Teams today. Do you have people who are talking about AI and the way that they're using AI in Teams channels? Awesome. Those are your influencers. So tap them and engage with them in how would they be interested in maybe hosting a peer-to-peer Teams channel and how to use AI in this role, right? Or to hack. We have a, hack your content Teams channel in Gartner, because we talk about as analysts, how can we use AI to most effectively help us do the type of research and analysis and ideation? Like, how can we use our AI toolmates to help us accomplish this? Like, CIOs, use your Teams channels, find out who's talking about it, and then just say, hey, would you be interested, right? Like, there's an opportunity for you to help bring your peers along. And you've identified your influencers. You've identified your first little cohort of people who can help facilitate these hallucination hunts, right? Who can help evangelize what they are doing with AI in their use cases and how effective it can be in helping them do their jobs better and helping them be happier in their jobs. Mm-hmm. One little step.
One little step, but a big impact it can make.
Yes.
All right. So the last question we like to end on, do you have any current book recommendations for our listeners, either related to our discussion today or even just something you've enjoyed personally?
Sure. So I was an English major, so I spent many, many years diving into literary classics, and now I don't do that as much anymore in the summertime in particular. So I'm deep into book reads from authors like, Nora Roberts or rereading Michael Crichton. But right now I am reading J.T. Ellison's Lie to Me. So I'm very big on kind of, murdery mysteries type stuff for my summer reading. Anything you read enhances your critical thinking skills. So just read something.
Yes, and exactly. As you noted, critical thinking skills are a key part of what our workforce is going to need, our society is going to need. So listeners, we encourage you to read whatever brings you joy.
That's right. Read all of the things. Don't stop reading.
Yes. Well, Mandi, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a great conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful.
And thanks to everyone for listening to this latest episode of ThinkCast, featuring Gartner Distinguished Vice President Analyst Mandi Bishop. To learn more about this topic, follow the links in the notes. For more episodes like this, be sure to subscribe, and don't forget to leave a review, drop a comment, and share with a colleague so neither of you will miss it.